Hello.
Nice to see some new faces, some familiar faces. Yeah, I'll just give a couple minutes, partially for the recording to make sure that it starts, and then also so a couple more people can trickle in. But yeah, thank you for joining us on this session about AI writing feedback. I know it's an interesting one, that's for sure. Let me also make sure that okay. Can everyone see my screen okay also? Nice. Great. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started actually, because the beginning is just going to be us chatting about an interesting article that I saw recently. But yes, thank you again for joining us for this session on using Flint for AI writing feedback. As a little recap of what we'll do today, we started to starting these sessions off with some ice-breaking news, basically news about AI that we think is kind of worth discussing. And then I'll demo really quickly how essay writing in Flint can work, just so we can level set, so people who maybe haven't had the chance to play around with it can see what that looks like. And then I'll share some tips I have for setting up these sorts of writing activities. I know there's like a bunch of things to note when it comes to AI giving students feedback on writing. I'm sure some of you have found it's often by default too helpful. So I'll share how to kind of reel that in. And then finally, we have some awesome teachers on the call. I had the pleasure of reading through everyone's registration, and I also reached out to Krista and Evan from Kincaid beforehand. So I'm sure there's plenty of people who can share how they're using it. And yeah, we'll leave plenty of time for questions as well. Okay. And yeah, housekeeping things. The recording will be available later, and questions are welcome at any time. We really like to have these like very interactive. So I'll try and pause at a bunch of points for questions, but also if something comes to mind, feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute and ask it directly. But yeah, to dive into the icebreaking news, so I saw this headline from the Boston Globe that said AI in the classroom could spare educators from having to teach writing. And essentially, this author was saying that, it takes a lot of time to teach writing, and AI is getting better and better at writing. So would it be such a terrible thing to have teachers focus more on like facilitating the intellectual curiosity of students, helping them build out their ideas, and then have AI take on the load of like teaching grammar and spelling and all of that? And one of the interesting quotes from this that I found was that the author said, "The universe of human knowledge is nearly infinite, but the school year is not. Because of every curricular decision having an opportunity cost, teaching more of one thing means cutting something else. And teachers spend a lot of time trying to sort out the need to know from the nice to know. And basically, they're arguing that given what AI can do, writing may no longer be a need to know." Yeah, feel free to share your thoughts on this if you have any. I don't know if you all have seen this start happening in your classroom or if you're thinking about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you. One of the first questions that leaps to my mind with an article like this is what are we talking about when we talk about writing? I think that that's an important question to drill down into in terms of nuance. I mean, we are talking about so many different things when we're talking about writing. And that an article like this is interesting, but it could be doing a disservice with that kind of general language.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess follow-up question for you then. Are there like two buckets of like writing in your mind where some of it maybe makes sense for AI to help students with and some less so?
Yeah, at least two buckets, yes. So I think about like what I think this quote is getting to is that some of the need to know things like the mechanics of writing. So the mechanics of writing, the grammar, the punctuation, usage issues, can AI teach that? I definitely think it can help. I've seen it help students, for example, who have learning disabilities, who are terrible spellers to the point where I can't understand them. And by the time I'm talking about a senior, for example, I cannot understand what he's saying. But if I run it through AI, I can. I don't know that student is going to be able to learn grammar and mechanics in time for college. So I see what Flint and AI can offer him as something extremely valuable. And it's not necessarily for lack of trying that he doesn't know it. It's truly a learning difference. In terms of like writing, like developing arguments, generating ideas, that's writing as well. All writing is thinking. So when we talk about writing, we're also talking about thinking. And one of the things that my colleagues and I are trying to parse is like where do we want AI's thinking help in the writing process? I hope that answers the question a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Krista. Yeah, go ahead, Seth. Oh, Seth, if you're speaking, you're still muted.
There you go. It took me a second to figure out how to unmute.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point in terms of what is writing skill specifically. Obviously, this is a quote. We're not being that specific, but in terms of using the AI, I think the students, we've been treating it kind of like a calculator, where it's great once you're out of elementary school and you know what the calculator's doing. So all it's doing is a shortcut for what you already understand. But if you're not teaching the kid how to write, the question then is the student aware enough to be able to evaluate the AI's responses? If it's giving them stuff, and I run into this in times in class where I'm having it specifically designed to help them work through the process. Here, prep for this Socratic, prep for this thing, even pre-grade your essays before you hand them to me to get the low-hanging fruit. But if they don't know whether or not the response is a good one, then they don't know what parts of the AI to throw away and what parts not. And they have to remember that it's like walking a dog. You're the one holding the leash. The dog is not walking you.
Very true. Very true. Very true. Yeah. Michelle, did you want to add to that or another point?
Yeah, I think Krista's onto something in terms of talking about the thinking, but I think there's so much rich discourse and cognitive things that happen in conversations around writing. And even if it's just giving kids a literary prompt as a teaser or anticipation guide to tap into their prior knowledge before they get into the heart of the writing, there's so much richness that comes out of that. And so for me as a formal language arts teacher, I can visualize having my students write and then perhaps teaching them how to refine a prompt, because we know there's a lot of craft and skill that comes into writing a prompt. Perhaps they write a prompt about the exact same thing they've written about, let AI produce that paper, do a comparison Venn diagram kind of thing in their own exercise, and compare and contrast where the overlaps are and see if they can learn how to refine their work. But we don't want them to lose their thinking and their heart and their spirit and their humanity, because there's so much that goes on in the process of writing. I can just remember, because I'm older than everybody here probably. I can remember when everything first shifted to computers, because I really wasn't a typist, and it took a long time for me to replace that pen and that pencil in my hand, because the pen and my brain were one. It took a while to shift to the computer. And so it's the same thing with this. We have so much that we can gain from integrating this generative process, but there's also a lot that can be lost. And so I think we have to balance those two.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I know this is like a very kind of polarizing topic. So thank you for entertaining me with this conversation.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like Louise Rosenblatt said, you have the text and you have the reader, and then that poetry is right there in the center. We don't want to lose the poetry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and Sohan seems to agree it's not just about the end result, but also the process of writing. And yeah, I think that is a good segue into how we actually do this with Flint. Yeah, I'll go ahead and demonstrate how you can create an essay style activity in Flint. But I think like like what we were discussing earlier, I think a lot of what it comes down to is like what part of the process that you want AI to help with is really something to keep in mind. And then also how you want the AI to act with the student is also something to keep in mind. So the two questions you should be asking yourself are always like, yeah, what is the task at hand that I want students to accomplish through this conversation with AI? And also, what sort of persona do I want this AI to take on? And I think that will help you create a successful activity in Flint. Yeah, so here I will go ahead and start off with this shortcut of creating writing with feedback. But of course, if you have like a very specific idea in mind, also you can create a custom activity. But here, if I click this, it'll just like auto populate this first prompt for me. And then basically Flint will start helping me decide what the details here need to look like. So I did have a example topic. I'm gonna copy that in. But essentially I'm going to say for 7th grade students, I want them to write a narrative essay on the topic of an unusual superpower. And here I've put in the actual prompt for AI to reference. And so I'll send that in. In terms of like, it's good to say like what grade your students are in. Flint will often ask for that directly. That way the AI will know like what language level to be using with the students, because AI is trained on a bunch of stuff written by adults. It tends to stray very complicated and sophisticated. So telling the AI how to level that for your students is pretty important. Yeah, and then it's already created this for me, and I can see like all of the details of this sort of very almost generic setup for an essay writing activity has been done. And yeah, so like this can be used directly. I'll show you how to customize it later on though. But yeah, any changes that you want, similar to if you were giving feedback to a teaching assistant, I would just tell Flint directly in this chat here if you wanted to guide it more on how helpful it should be with students or what rubric it should be using. I will show you how all of that kind of looks different as you work more with Flint. But yeah, essentially, firstly though, I wanted to touch on what the student experience looks like. So I'm actually going to pull up this activity. Wait, sorry, not this one. This one. Okay. So when the students go in, they can start a conversation with Flint, and yeah, you can ask Flint to like have a essay attachment for them ready at hand. And so this is where I think like the step in the writing process that you want it to focus on with the students is kind of important. So for example, I like told it like generically like how students are writing about this. So, but I think it would have been better to say like, oh, okay, students have a draft and I want you to review that draft with them. And then it will know that, you know, it's not doing like the brainstorming of the topic as much as it is doing the evaluation of what the students already have. But of course, if the students are at the brainstorming phase, you can also use Flip for that. So I'm sure we'll see some examples later on of what all of that can look like. But yeah, essentially what I'm trying to get at is that the experience for the student is heavily based on what expectations you've set for Flint. But yeah, essentially I wanted to show what this essay attachment looks like. So when the students go in, they can open this attachment and each step of I guess, new draft that they put into Flint will be visible to you. So here's like the initial one that it attached to the initial message. And then the student went in, pasted their writing about how they had the superpower to change various foods into tasting like cheese. And then Flint was able to give some generic feedback on the strengths of their writing, suggested improvement for like sensory details, emotional depth, resolution development. And yeah, students can have a conversation with this writing tutor almost. So like if I asked it, what grade would I get? This one I actually uploaded a rubric into. So it graded me based on the rubric, saying that I got a 4 out of 5. And it was able to give specific feedback to reach that advanced 5 level. So this is where like adding in a rubric can be really helpful. And I'll show you what that looks like in comparison in the settings once you add in a rubric and how specific Flint can cater the feedback for you. Yeah, and then it's like, where can I add sensory details? Flint is giving some suggestions here too. Yeah, did we have a question or was that a quick hand raise? Good, okay. Yeah, so essentially, as students are working with Flint, they can have like these sort of side conversations, and all of this is visible to you, so you can see the students' thinking process and see how, like what sorts of questions students are asking, how Flint's responding to them, what students are digging deeper into. And then also when the students are using it, they can actually highlight specific parts of their writing. Like here, if I highlighted this, it'll automatically put that into the Flint message for me, and it'll have that section highlighted, so I can ask specific questions about that section. Yeah, so if I said like, how can I improve my introduction? Flint knows that I am asking about that specific part that I highlighted, and it's able to give me some suggestions here. Yeah, and as you can see, like it's giving me suggested revisions, and I know like that might be not what we want and maybe causing some red flags to go up, but I'll also show you in a sec how to kind of reel that ability in as well. Any questions about actually setting up the activity? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. A quick question. It's kind of what you're talking about right now. Can you tell Flint, can you program Flint to use lingo that you've used in your classroom and targets and the you know the terms that they hear in the class, and then AI can present those same terms in her review?
Yeah, yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah. I've actually heard some interesting examples of that. I guess so. The way that I would functionally do that is maybe create a document with like a list of those terms and like what they mean for you, or an Excel sheet, however you want to share that with Flint. And then I would upload that into the settings as you're setting up the activity. As an example of a teacher that has used this, there's this, I believe she teaches 3rd grade, teacher from Westminster in Atlanta. She like says specific phrases when students like miss something or like they mess up something, like oh boogers specifically was an example that she gave. And so she compiled all of that into a list and put that into Flint, and Flint would incorporate that into its feedback for the students.
Thank you. That answered my question. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks Sohan for addressing the things in the chat. But yeah, so I think in general, the student experience can be through the conversation and it can be through the essay drafting. And yeah, as I was showing here, there's like the versions of the draft that you as the teacher can see. And I think also it might just be good to mention to students that they can highlight and ask about specific portions of their writing as well. I think that's like the extent of what training for students needs to look like. Oh yeah, go ahead, Evan.
I had a question about the text editing tool. Is there, where does that editor come from? And then is there a way that we could say incorporate a live Google Doc into the text editing?
Yeah, we don't have Google Doc integration at this moment, though I think that would be really cool. The editor is actually one of the tools in this like bottom bar included in Flint. So we have things like drawing on a whiteboard, writing code, inserting math equations. But there's also this write an essay option, which essentially opens a, I would say, knockoff Google Doc where students can like format their writing and everything. And then if they do finish that drafting process with Flint and want to move it into a Google Doc to work on further, maybe without the help of AI, they can use this button to copy the text and then paste it in directly.
And can I follow up on that by asking, is there within this a way for teachers to engage in the feedback process?
Yeah. So let me find an example. I would say it's not like the most elaborate feedback process engagement, but when the student has submitted a session, you'll be able to see all of their strengths, areas of improvement, follow up, and they'll also receive that from the AI directly. So it's like we're promoting that immediate feedback cycle. And you as the teacher can also leave your additional feedback here about the session that they had with the AI. So you can like comment on how well they ask questions or like what you think next steps should be for them. It's not like as specific, I would say, as like leaving comments in a Google Doc or something like that. But you can like kind of have a final catch-all say here.
So where Flint can identify, because if you click on the highlighted sections for strengths and areas of improvement, it goes to a specific section of their work.
Yes.
Is there a way to do that with the teacher feedback as well?
Oh.
Or can you add teacher feedback to like the strengths or areas of improvement that Flint has already identified, where we can add a comment onto Flint's comment?
Yeah, there's not a way to do that currently, but those are both very good ideas. Thank you. Yeah, we're always looking for ways to improve the platform, so all questions welcome.
And chiming in there real quick, Evan, yeah, like Lulu said, it's not currently possible. One workaround you can have her teachers do is you see that print session button up at the top. You can technically print the session, get it as a PDF, and then we've seen teachers like put those into OneNote or like another tool and like basically comment on the PDF. So that will have everything on it. It'll have the analytics, it'll have all the back and forth messages, but you're kind of going outside of the platform in order to do that.
Yeah. Oh, and then Seth, did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, just real quick on Evan's question. Like I said, there's nothing to be able to write in there if you want a record. But one thing a couple of us have done is, because it does really nice if you're working on an assignment, that you can watch the student develop their work in over time in the fourth dimension. It is neat that you can schedule a day to have a conference with them, just like you would any other kind of paper. And you can go over and say, okay, let's look at the conversation you had and talk about their development of their essay. And what was your thought process here? Why were you thinking this? How we did this? And that is neat, because usually you just get a final product from the kid and you just have to talk about that. But now you can actually, and they tell you, oh, this is what I thought. It's like, well, was it? And because now you can actually see what they wrote. It's like, no. You say this is what you did, but this is what you actually did, which is neat.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think last week we had a Campfire session about like making student thinking visible and really like honing in on like how can we create activities that both push students to think more and also make that all like documented through the conversation with AI. Yeah, so that's like exactly an awesome use case that we're definitely pushing for now. Great, yeah, so let me come back really quickly to my presentation. But yeah, Flint activities can be set up for various parts of the writing process, like I kind of mentioned. I'll share, actually, let me make sure to share this presentation with you all so that you can have access to these templates. But essentially, yeah, I found some templates within our template library that kind of touch on a couple parts of this. But honestly, this list was also inspired by a list that Krista sent me earlier this week or last week. But yeah, you can have students like focus on reading comprehension and analysis, having students role play with different characters of readings and using that to help bolster their ideas for maybe a written piece that comes later. There's like research things that Flint can help with as well, because Flint has the ability to cite sources and search the web. So it can really help students find additional sources and evidence for backing up any arguments that they're trying to make in writing. Pre-writing or like thesis outline development, also a good one. Like the picture on the right-hand side here is from a template from a teacher who has created a thesis statement practice activity. But then again, I've shown some examples of how to also create the draft feedback and post-draft feedback as well with Flint. Yeah. Okay. Any questions again about like this initial setup process? Next, I'll move on to tips on how to make sure that these activities behave the way that you want. Great. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so tips for activity setup. I like kind of glossed over these a little bit, so I wanted to like make sure that we have like dedicated time for this. But yeah, in terms of AI guidelines, AI will take guidelines very literally. I had a meeting last week with an administrator who said, yeah, I was talking to one teacher. She told Flint not to do X and Y and kind of just assumed that it wouldn't do Z. But of course, AI is like, it doesn't have like the context, I guess, or the personality of a teacher almost, where it would understand that if you're asking it not to do two things, then the third one should be included. So basically for you all, that means that I encourage you to be as specific as possible when setting up the guidelines for Flint activities. And kind of along those lines, Flint will not always recognize when an example is helpful versus readily usable. And sometimes this will mean that Flint will write something thinking, oh, this is like a good example for the student to go off of. But of course, a student might just be very tempted to just take that and put it into their writing. So like on the right-hand side here, I've put in some examples of prompts that you can put into Flint that will help to keep that from happening. Like do not write the whole essay or any parts of the essay, or more specifically, if you still want to give them a lot of guidance, you can say provide guidance indirectly without writing any examples students could use in their essay. So like hyper-specific guidelines like that are really helpful. Yeah, and then also in terms of like focusing the conversation of Flint, sometimes Flint will happily go on tangents if you don't specify like what exactly the goal of that activity is. So if you want Flint to just focus on giving feedback on what students have already written, then you probably want to specify that. Otherwise, it might kind of start this endless rabbit hole of students adding more and more to their idea that might go beyond the scope of your assignment. Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
So I know the purpose of this meeting is kind of just give an outline and introduction to people, but out of curiosity, with the activities, one thing I ran into in one activity I did was a student talking to the AI they were using in class for the Flint, and then going to an outside AI, getting it to do stuff, and then pasting that stuff into the Flint AI. And I imagine the only way to combat that would be to have some kind of AI detection software, which is unreliable at best, and also creating their own AI's training sessions inside Flint, and just taking, hey, what are the instructions of this assignment? And then taking that, copying it, creating their own AI chatbot, getting it to do it, and then copying and pasting that into the thing. Which again, we all know that just defeats the purpose. Like you're not hurting anyone but you, child. But just as an oddity, because I have noticed them doing that, and they sometimes I'll randomly find that a month ago they created one for another class that they don't have permission to be using it for, but I have no way of monitoring that, especially with 100 kids.
I see.
I'm if this is off topic, I'm happy to not be answered, but just FYI, since that kind of reminded me of it.
No. Yeah, you're good. You're good. I think, of course, with like writing, but also a bunch of other subjects, we've come across this issue of like, how do we make sure that kids are using AI for good and in a productive fashion? And yeah, really, it takes a lot of like, I think, very intentional design of your activities, and like also coaching students on like maybe even from a behavioral standpoint. But yeah, I understand like for you all, it's probably like an ongoing problem trying to find a solution for. And like our team, we don't necessarily have a great answer either, but always happy to chat about this.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're good.
Yeah, I just want to jump in, mention one thing. One thing our team is looking at, although we can't like fully commit to this until we like, finalize as part of our product roadmap, is adding like copy paste detection into Flint, possibly even the ability to prevent pasting in assignments. There's just a lot of edge cases we have to figure out. Like, for example, does that mean we prevent students from uploading sources or pasting in links to websites if it's like a research activity? But adding copy paste detection is like a middle ground solution that we're at least exploring. Obviously, we really hope there's some amazing AI detector comes out that we can use, but that seems unrealistic. So maybe like a paste detection is going to be our intermediary solution. But yeah, we'll get.
I know nobody's got a good solution. I just wanted to comment because I think it goes back to our original discussion on the writing, because we all know it's becoming more and more ubiquitous. So I also don't have the solution, but I've been trying to think. Every assignment I have to come in it with the assumption that they have access to the most permissive AI, and just write the assignment with that assumption that they are using it on here. How can I get academic goodness from that? And because I'm not fighting the storm. I can't keep back the tidal wave.
Yeah. It's an interesting time. For sure. Yeah. I was looking at Michelle's question also in the chat of, could you prompt Flint to format all responses as open-ended questions that require the student to reflect on the writing and perhaps focus on a specific concept or idea? I think that's like a perfect direct quote that you could put into your activity as you're setting it up. Yeah, like my main feedback or suggestion, I guess, is to just treat Flint like a teaching assistant. So you can give it feedback in very plain language, just like that, and it will figure out how to incorporate that into the settings for you. Yeah, so that's like a great specific example of a guideline that you could set.
And actually, on that point, to jump in, Lulu, if you don't mind me screen sharing real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to show like one way you could ask Flint to help understand like exactly what it will and won't help your students with. Let's say you go into the settings. Lulu showed some great prompt examples of like what you could tell Flint to do. Like, hey, don't write any part of my students' writing, or don't help them with revisions or anything like that. You can also just ask where and when will you help students with their writing, right? You can just ask it about its own behavior and intentions. If you just send that in as a message, Flint will actually go through its own prompting and then create a nice summary for you. So it's going to say, okay, according to everything that's been set up now, here's what I'll help with. But we could make this clearer. Now, do you want me to explain things? Do you have any follow-up questions based off of that? So if you're unsure about how you set up the activity, just ask Flint like a teaching assistant, like, hey, if my kids do get stuck, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to go ahead and write it for them? Are you going to give them help in this way? What comments will you make? And you can basically use it as a brainstorming partner and then tell it what changes you want to make. So sometimes when I'm like setting up an activity, especially for like a class that I haven't taught before, because my past experience isn't being a teacher, I'll like ask Flint for some ideas. I'll kind of lean on it as an assistant, and then it'll come back to me and give me some different options. So that might be another thing you can try.
Yeah. Thanks, Owen. Yeah, I also wanted to show really quickly actually what it looks like once you've like added more of that prompting. So here I have like 2 sessions created, one without guidelines for Flint not to write things for students, and one after adding those guidelines. So let me show you the one without guidelines first. And in here, let's see. Okay, so I put in this was an activity for 1984. Students were supposed to analyze specific diary entries by the main character. And yeah, I put in my draft, and then it gave me all of this feedback. But and then when I asked it for like ideas on a specific concept, it started to create actual examples at some point. Yeah, so here it's like giving me the original paragraph and like giving me a revised version straight up. That was actually also very long. So here, like just through asking questions, here's an example of how, like by default, it'll be very helpful. So it's important to add those sorts of prompts that, you know, kind of guide how you want it to be giving feedback to students. So here, after I added guidelines telling it not to write things for students, you can see the difference in how it's providing feedback. So here I asked, like, how can I make my thesis stronger? So it quotes my original thesis, and then it does the actual feedback by giving me questions to consider, and then like showing like ideas that I can put into my writing. And then it gives me a framework, but it doesn't actually do any of the writing for me. So I thought that was all like 3 really good ways of how students might be able to take in new feedback and put that into their writing. Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
I'm so sorry. My planning period is about to end, so I'm going to have to go to class here. But so I just want to say thank you for those ideas. And another thing I played with was for those worried is the AI going to write the lesson for them? One essay I did is I gave the kid a persona. I said, here's the rubric, and told the AI, you are a D-level student. Told it to write a really crappy essay according to the rubric, and then the assignment for the kids was you have to be the tutor, you have to correct it. And so they were learning to evaluate the AI's responses so that they could get it to an A-level paper, and that avoided the AI doing the work. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've heard something similar actually, where as like the initial introduction to Flint, the teacher had AI create a response to the writing prompt, and then they compared it to like a previous student response as well. And then the students like kind of bashed on how the AI wrote it, and like that really helped students see like the limitations of when you just get AI to write something for you, and like how it's really not as good as if you were to like actually go deep into the content and like support your reasoning with evidence and everything. But yeah, thanks for sharing that stuff. That's really cool. Great. Yeah, in the interest of time, I will continue on. But yeah, in terms of, so we have like guidelines in Flint that's like basically defining the AI's persona and kind of what sort of guardrails it should be following as it's giving students feedback. And then there's also the rubric in Flint. So I kind of wanted to like also touch on rubrics and how you can edit those as well. But of course, like Flint activities can be formative or summative. And I think like it would be great to upload your own rubric to have Flint apply that sort of feedback to students directly. And like, even if you don't have a rubric for an activity, at the very least, it's really important to describe what you want Flint to tutor students about. For example, like a tutor that is helping students deepen their analysis will be very different from a tutor that's just helping them like catch all of their grammar mistakes and everything. Yeah, so for example, you can ask Flint to grade students on a plus minus system if you want to give like that very specific grade back to the student. Or you can even say, don't give students grades, tell them that their teacher will grade them, and then you can have the rubric in Flint be more, not as like numerical. And then, yeah, and then like if you were wanting to have it do something very specific, like check for grammar and spelling mistakes, I would just like make sure to tell the activity that. But yeah, here's like an example of a grading rubric that was just made by Flint by default versus one that I think I had uploaded the like Common Core rubric from like the Mississippi district. And so the grading rubric that it was able to grab from the rubric that I had uploaded is so much more specific and has like all of these different categories. So it's really easy. This was like all done by Flint automatically just by me uploading something, but it's just like something to keep in mind. Great. Yeah, so I wanted to leave plenty of time for some teachers to share what they've been doing and for people to ask questions. I know I kind of targeted Krista and Evan for this, but of course anyone else is welcome to share as well. But yeah, just want to hear like how you all have been using it, what you found helpful, and how it's been working out, I guess.
Lulu, do you want, can I share a screen?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay. So I'm going to have to leave early. So if you don't mind, I'll just jump in and show you. Let's see. It might take me a minute to do this, so maybe not.
Maybe Krista had to reopen her browser for that.
Yeah, I hope we didn't lose her.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess actually one of the specific questions that I had been asked was, to what extent do teachers provide feedback directly to students during the composition process, and when do they use Flint to provide that feedback with less teacher oversight? I don't know if anyone has like worked out that process yet with their students. If you all want to share.
Lulu, Mark here. I was intrigued with the gentleman that was talking about having Flint write a D+ paper and then have the students identify the weaknesses. The cool thing about that, and by the way, I am a novice to Flint, so right across the forehead. That intrigues me because then the students really are talking about writing and saying, well, this is missing a thesis statement, or it's a confusing thesis statement, and they're actually generating thinking in their head, and we are sitting there listening to it. It's not something that we're reading, and there's less AI to come into it. So I put a little star next to that idea. That seems to make sense, unless I'll defer to the experts on the web here, if that's not wise for me to think that way.
I mean, I think it's great. I feel like the like concept of needing to teach something usually means that the students need to show like a lot of mastery on that subject. So it's almost like they're becoming the teacher, and the fact that they each individually can do that with Flint. So you can see like where the students are like kind of missing things and where each student is doing really well. Yeah, I think that's really powerful actually. Yeah.
So I'll chime in at this point to just share a couple of things that, like what Mark was talking about. I had some students, and like Lulu just shared, I had some students who, in a sense, became their own teacher through the process, in that they were given an essay assignment to work with Flint through and to understand how their writing could be formed in the first place. It was more idea generation than actual writing. And I had a student who was so desperate to begin the writing process that he began to ask Flint to do the writing for him, and did that thing that we're all afraid that students will do. So in looking back through, he explicitly asked, like, hey, can you turn this into an essay? I need the essay to be 1,000 words. I need the essay to do an intro, a conclusion, that sort of thing. And I hadn't set up the parameters well enough to tell it not to do that. And so it wrote him an essay. But what the student discovered is that what Flint had presented, he knew wouldn't fit the parameters of what the assignment was for class. And so what the student began to do was to ask more specific guiding questions, like, can you create a new draft that includes specific quotes? Can you have the quotes embedded in this way? Can you have the quotes focus on this type of analysis? Can you point out the key points of detail and evidence that support the argument, and they name the argument? So in doing so, the student who is clearly trying to find ways to manage his learning found his own path into learning, right? So he specifically targeted the work that Flint did and said, can you redo this paragraph outline by providing 3 pieces of evidence for Act 3, Scene 3, specifically the topic sentence that deals with falconry metaphors in Othello, and can you have that falconry metaphor shift from loving imagery to control imagery? So in this moment, I'm watching this kid who I initially thought of as just finding an easy way to get the assignment done. This student began to discover the joy of learning in the midst of this process. And was learning how a paper functions. Like, how do I integrate quotes? How does Shakespeare's imagery of falconry fit into the ideas of control and love? Like, that is so far beyond where I thought my 10th grade student would be. But in his desire to engage with Flint in its essay writing process, he got to somewhere new. And so Lulu's observation that even in approaching like a D-level paper or whatever, the student becomes their own teacher, I thought that was extremely astute and a really nice way of putting it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think also Krista was able to hop back on, maybe. Want to give her time to share if she was able to.
Okay, I'll try again. I'm trying to share my screen. Let's see. Okay.
Should be-
So,
Okay, nice.
so this is one of the things that I was, you know, trying to control where students enter the process, which is what I started today talking about. I sent this to Lulu, and it's just an outline of what a previous assignment looked like. So because I want my high school students to be able to generate their own ideas before they ask AI to generate their ideas, they begin writing in a writer's notebook. And they're practiced with that. They write to a timer and they have a lot of experience. I've taught them how to capture, you know, whatever comes to their head, put it down. Don't judge it. And that's a very important part of my writing practice is every day they have to write like that for 4 minutes. And so they're writing about anything at the time. Did somebody say something? So anything, but then when we get to the paper writing process, I will ask them to begin brainstorming in their writer's notebook, trying to devise a thesis. And of course, they've been taught what theses are. So then they take it to Flint. That is when they go to Flint and they ask for, you know, is this an argumentative enough thesis? Or can you help me make this thesis more concise? Or can you offer me a counter argument so that I know if this thesis is arguable from a, you know, like a tense place? So then that's like a small movement into Flint and they come back out. Then they get into groups where they share the theses that they've developed with the help of Flint. And then they choose one as a group. And they take it to a whiteboard. And on that whiteboard, then they write that thesis down, whichever one they've chosen out of 4. And they then use, you know, their books to find all the evidence that they can find to support that thesis that has been provisionally designed by one student, refined by Flint, shared with one another. Now they're working to get evidence. Okay, so then they go home and they can use Flint. Like, my understanding is that I cannot control what they do at home. They have access to Flint, and I'm going to assume that they're going to use it. I'm going to assume because they're teenagers, they're going to do that thing that teenagers do, which is to try to figure out how to get the essay to write, written for them. But that's okay because they're going to have to come back into class the next day or the next class day, and they're going to have to write in a lockdown browser. So the school I teach at has 2 different versions of a lockdown browser that we can use. So while they may have asked Flint to write me this essay, and Flint may have done it, they're going to have to remember it, and they can bring in quotes, but they can, and the thesis that they're going to use, but they cannot bring in the commentary or the analysis. If they've practiced with Flint at home, good for them. They're still going to have to be able to show me what they can do with the help that they got. To me, that is equivalent in some ways to going to a tutor, which many of my independent school students do, and get a lot of help that way or a lot of help from their parents. So whether they're getting help from their parents, a tutor, or AI outside of my purview, that's nothing I can control. So I'm trying to use Flint in these ways that target, right, exactly, Michelle, they're retrieving what Flint helped them think. And that retrieval is where the learning is happening. And I see that some students who are already good writers, can put it together beautifully. Struggling writers can put it together better than they could without Flint in the past, if that makes sense. So I wanted to share, like, figuring out how to design it in a way that isn't just off, like giving Flint all of the processing, but like pulling these targeted things into a bigger process and using a variety of strategies. Students like working together, finding evidence together for a thesis is fun for them. And this semester, like, they want to now know how to devise their own theses. Like, that's an intrinsic motivation that many of them put in their reflections on their midterm. Like, okay, I now want to know how to do this on my own. I could never have done that. I could never have planted that seed with, they have to have that desire. I can't make them want to write great theses. So thank you. I'm going to have to jump off, but thank you so much for this source. And thank you for Flint. I love it.
Thank you, Krista.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I really love that Krista was able to come and share her process, because when she sent me that email with like the very specific what she does in the writing phase, what she does for like student group work, I just thought it was really cool that she had really created a process where it's not like, oh, this is AI, this is not AI. It's like, this is where AI fits into the whole thing, and where also we're making time for like students to interact with each other, because I think like learning from peers is also something really important, and that sometimes gets lost when we just focus on like, okay, where can we squeeze AI in? So I think like her whole process was really thoughtful, and it was really cool to see. Yeah, any other, oh wait, actually any other questions? I was just checking that there were no more slides. About like writing with Flint, any concerns even?
Can I just share for anyone who's still on the call that
Yeah.
Krista and I work together, and Krista is my inspiration and my thought partner for engaging with AI. And I think that is essential. Like, it's great to go out there and explore and try new things, and having someone to do that with who thinks differently, like, allows you to have just all these different modes and facets of approaching a similar challenge. So again, but if you have questions about our process or what Krista just shared, though she has to go to teach, I can help to answer those.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. And this was like something that I like to point out also. Our team, we really partner mostly with schools as a whole. Like, we don't want to sell to individual teachers, partially because like teachers already have like way too much that schools are trying to get them to subscribe to, but also just like that sort of environment and community that can be fostered when you partner with the whole school, get everyone on board. Okay, we're going to try AI. We're using this tool. We've seen that, yeah, that creates a lot of really good conversation, and especially when teachers are able to support each other and kind of brainstorm together. That's also like why we started these campfire sessions, to kind of branch it beyond an individual school. But yeah, it's really great to hear that you all are able to work so closely like that. Yeah, I guess a question that someone had asked me because they couldn't make it to the session was, were there any unexpected benefits from using Flint for writing that you all found in your journey?
So I shared one right before Krista did, and that was finding an access point for students who may not feel that they have access to writing. Maybe their whole career as writers, they've been told that they fit into a certain box, like you're a B level or C level student, or whatever it might be, and that these students begin to see avenues and openings for their own learning, because AI doesn't judge. AI is seeking to help and not seeking to diminish their efforts. And so everything is celebrated, and it's celebrated in real time. And any feedback that is given is not filtered through any perceived prejudice, right? There's no teacher prejudice built into it or an anticipated goal that, like, if you're not meeting it, you're not good enough. So the students feel so much more open and vulnerable in what they share. Like, they're trying things. Like my student who tried to do something that perhaps wasn't, in his best interest, but he learned so much through it because he was willing to try. And so that was something that I think I learned, and that Krista has shared from the beginning of her experience, that the use of AI provides access points, and Flint as a platform allows for those access points to be institutional. So like we can get in and see, we can interact, we can engage as well.
Evan, on the lighter side, I have to tell you, I feel like it's like alcohol's anonymous, and what you just said is very comforting to me to know that there is some good things that can happen with AI. Because at my age, I'm thinking, what a monster, and how is it that we can use it properly? So, Lulu, this has been incredibly helpful for a novice, not a novice teacher, mind you, but someone that is excited about using this in such a powerful way, as has been explained by Evan and Krista and all of you. So, but it is encouraging to listen to you guys say, no, there is some value to this. So thanks for that.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for coming also and participating and asking good questions. Yeah, we have like about 3 minutes left, so I'll wrap up really quickly, but happy to take additional questions, or if anyone also wants to share other ways that they've been using AI in their process, that would be really cool to hear about. But yeah, we do have our next session. I don't know if this is relevant to anyone on the call, but it's for world languages next week. It'll be a bit later so that we can catch some of the schools that are also in Asia. But yeah, any additional sessions that come up will also be on our calendar page. So if you subscribe there, I had been forgetting to actually send the emails about updates for when new sessions are posted, but oh, thanks so much. Yeah, you can subscribe there to be emailed when new sessions are posted on our calendar. And then also either tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow, maybe the day after, I'll also post the recording to the session on our website here. And an email will also go out once that's live as well. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming. If there's any remaining questions or stories that people want to share, I'm all ears.
Thank you. I'm going to say thank you. Looking forward to the world languages one because I'm a French teacher. I don't teach English this year. But as I was listening, I created a coach for French writing as well. So it really helped me out with that because the students are quite struggling. I'm in an IB school and it's very standardized. But it's great because I just have to say it's an IB exam, and then Flint finds the right what you call a band and the right feedback to give. So I'm really excited to try it out with them next week.
Nice. Awesome.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much. Very insightful. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Lulu, and all. I'm off to an athletic practice. So see you. Very helpful.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone. Thanks for coming.